Cut. Yeah, exactly. And this is what I did the last month. I just read a lot about critiques on degrowth and was trying to gather them and review them then in an assignment that I wrote then in the end. Now I have to see how that works. Here we go. Okay, you can only see a little bit of the screen somehow. Yeah, there's more. That's it, yes. And I, of course, didn't gather all of them. It was hard for me to gather at least some and to put them in like one assignment then in the end. And what I tried to do is to show the discourse that is going on there. What was hard for me, because I mean, I'm not into degrowth that long yet, so I don't know so much about it yet. And in the assignment, and I will do that here in the PowerPoint as well, I will just let often just the authors talk from different papers or articles that I read. That just to show what they talk about. And that is not me that is talking actually. Yes. The first one, well, this was kind of the overview over the topics. Oops. I put it like, you have like here the Marxist critique, for example, different chapters in there, and the funding is also in smaller chapters that I will go into then later. And the vagueness. So degrowth is often described in some sentences, and you can describe it in like 3 sentences, but it's hard to capture everything. I will just read out here what they say. Degrowth is a democratically deliberated absolute reduction of material and energy throughput, which ensures well-being for all within planetary boundaries. Contrary to perpetuating economies driven by growth and profit, degrowth offers an alternative vision for societies centered on life-making, ecological sustainability, and social justice. Since degrowth is based on the principles of autonomy, solidarity, and direct democracy, bottom-up organizing is seen as key to making an equitable and just transformation happen. I have some more. Degrowth is a term that signifies radical political and economic reorganization to reduce energy and material flows while simultaneously increasing the human welfare. And another one. Degrowth is a planned reduction of energy and resource throughput designed to bring the economy back into balance with the living world in a way that reduces inequality and improves human well-being. But in these like descriptions, it stays for some people quite unclear what is meant with that, and it kind of divergent in defining what it encompasses. And then the questions come up: what does energy and material throughput mean? How should the society be reorganized exactly then? Yeah, then other things like Schwarzman writes, degrowth is frankly incapable of providing a viable political agenda for confronting the converging economic and ecological crisis for real existing fossil fuel nuclear capitalism in the face of growing threat of catastrophic climate change. And others say there is not enough empirical research, like quite clear ideas how the society should be organized. And there is an answer. Timothy Parikh wrote then on that, that degrowth is emerging from various backgrounds, and through that it has a lot of background from different research areas, but often not like labeled under the name of degrowth. So it can be quite unclear for people to realize what people mean then when they talk about it. And it seems often like there's not enough empirical research to support degrowth. And for that was then my conclusion, that there might need to be more relabeling in the name of degrowth to support its ideas and proposals, especially the political proposals then. Because yeah, there is some critiques that just say degrowth is not something that we want to go to. The next critique, the name. That is one critique that I often shared, the degrowth, especially the D before the growth, because usually when we have words that are something with D before, it means the opposite of the same word without the D. So it's hard to think of not the opposite of growth when we talk about degrowth. And examples are coupling, decoupling, stabilization, destabilization. And here we have a house, and it's hard to think of a beautiful house when we just talk about destruction. So it leads to a lot of misunderstanding what degrowth is about when you hear the degrowth term for the first time. And there are a lot of misconceptions what it says, what it is about. Okay, this is laggy. I hope you can read that all. Yeah, I think you can just read it yourself. They all share the common thing that they write about degrowth in a way that it is seen as a recession or depression of the economy. And of course, that leads to a misunderstanding and kind of a negative connotation towards the movement and the ideas of degrowth. And also, degrowth authors write often in a way that can kind of make it misunderstandable when they write sustainable degrowth is differentiated from unplanned degrowth or recession within the growth economy, as degrowth is a voluntary, smoothly planned and equitable transition to a state of lower production and consumption. Or when they call a recession real degrowth. And also I was surprised, for example, Kallis, who I think writes a lot about degrowth. It was 2010 that he wrote that, but for me, maybe you have other perceptions of degrowth, but for me, there is not like unsustainable degrowth that you can call it recession or depression then in the end of the economic sphere. And then, here we have a picture of growth. And if we have the dichotomy, I don't know how to pronounce it really, of growth and recession, then degrowth shouldn't be used as the opposite of growth, and that happens quite fast. The term is used as the opposite of growth, or like growth is increase and degrowth is decrease. But anyway, it is counterproductive if the term brings people to think of a recession in the first place, also if it is explained differently. So there is often the critique of, like, why do we use this term if it makes people think of something we don't want? It sounds like a loss. And there's also the fear that people might be scared off by the term before they realize the positive things that brings with it. there we have that. And there's a response to that from also the degrowth literature. And for that, like explaining why we have the term of degrowth and use it. I mean, there are also other words like terms like post-growth they often use is that we connect so many positive things to growth, and we love growth so much. That's why we have all these hearts there. That we cannot think of growth as a negative thing as well. And degrowth tries to break this connection to like this love to growth. And in that sense, degrowth is a hard term that makes people question it harder or more easily. And then often is used like comparisons of growth could also mean a higher rate of cancer or high rate increasing use of weapons. And that's also not something we want. So there's kind of this try to change the perception that we have to growth and also to decreasing something, to slowing down. And for that, some degrowth advocates think that the term is quite good to question the religion that we have to growth. And then in that sense, the term can be changed in this perception that like deregulation, for example, has positive connotations and negative connotations for people. And for example, anti-slavery also was for a long time a word that was not good, had not good connotation, and especially in the Western countries, and better connotations over the centuries. So the term can have a lot of resistance, but yeah, how they write it here, degrowth is a dirty word that disturbs, that stimulates a reaction, and that starts a debate. Branding something as degrowth protects it from being co-opted by people who do not genuinely adhere to the idea. And no one would build a highway, a nuclear reactor, issue more credit, or sell colas in the name of degrowth. And in that sense, they share the same perception that the polarization is not necessarily something bad that degrowth has, that it divides kind of and brings the discussion into the group in the space. And especially here, I cite Perique again, if nobody disagreed with degrowth, it would probably carry little hope of change. Or in reverse, if everybody agrees to the alternative, an example, Green New Deal or green growth, it then means that the alternative is not as different from the current system. So as we had like anti-slavery before, it kind of provokes something because it wants to change the whole system itself. The next thing that I often saw was that it was often described how degrowth should happen. It should be slow, simple, diverse, and fair. And on the other side, it has its highest value, democracy and autonomy, which is kind of contrary to what it has specific things that it wants to be, but then you can decide if you really want it. So there's kind of a political agenda, but nobody has to follow it, but please do it. And that leads us to the question, how can we be sure that a true Castorian democracy will choose a frugal degrowth mode? And I mean, we cannot be sure that people if they're living in a democracy, will choose democracy as well. I mean, in a democracy, we can decide against it, and we see it in a lot of countries that people are also choosing against it. And the degrowth literature is quite clear in that democracy should not be suspended under any circumstances, even for the sake of perceived environmental problems or survival. There's no choice between the environment and democracy. Sustainable degrowth should be a democratic process or a transition or nothing at all. And the degrowth movement is clear that it would stand for democracy before ecology. And anyway, there has been a clash between the environmentalism that says we should have regulations and rules and should kind of regulate ourselves to kind of save the planet and the nature, and then the direct democracy advocates that say we want the people to decide how they treat the nature, and in the ecology, nature gets its own value, which means that every living being is a moral subject itself. And in that sense, you can treat it right or wrong, like any other human being as well. And they see that nature gets its value through its strive to sustain itself and to survive. Now Siri got turned on. Okay. And we shouldn't change that as humans. We shouldn't, like they say, we shouldn't change the goal that nature gave itself. So then they want to give the nature a value as well. Degrowth, however, is in comparison an anthropocentric philosophy, so it puts the human being in the center. And the value is found more in the community and the connection to people. This like relational value is built over time, which means you can see it in communities or connections you have to places, to the nature, or children have to cuddle toys, which in essence doesn't really have a meaning or not much meaning or value, but it gets its high value from the value it gives for people. And out of that perspective, some degrowth adherents also pledge for an intrinsic value of nature, but more to be able to build this relationship to nature, to get people to question how they live with nature right now. And this is something, and then we come back to the beginning, something that we've always done. I mean, democracies work like that they restrict themselves, they build regulations, and decide to not to do something. And the freedom of the individual ends where the freedom of the other begins, which means we cannot 100% be autonomous always, because we always restrict other people when we do something, or we don't do something. And in that sense, to not restrict other people's autonomy too much, we came up with regulations. And there we are in the beginning again. We give ourselves rules and regulations in order to live in a specific way. And we can decide now in a democratically process if we want to live in a kind of direct democracy in a Mad Max environment, or have a technocratic society where we decide we want to put limits to ourselves. All right, here we have the usual sign of it goes up and growth is great, and this is our sign. This is our focus. And this is what degrowth focuses on as well, mostly GDP, its critique. One thing, if you don't, I expect you all know the words, but if you don't understand anything, any word or your questions, just ask. Yeah, and there are a lot of people who say this is the wrong target. We should focus more on a fundamental change of the society. Here again, some of that, let's say, degrowth is not engaging with the capitalistic structure of modern society by being based simply on ethics, good practices, and lifestyle rather than political conflict. The problem with capitalism is not in economic growth, but lack of planning, and so our target should be the mode of production, capitalism, not growth itself. Profitability, not abstract measurements like GDP is what matters. And then, it gets argued that the monothematic focus of the degrowth movement is hindering it from tackling the economic problems that we have and the problem of representative democracy. Degrowth is a useful distraction for capitalists from the true source of the inability to adequately deal with such problems, the anarchy of the market, and the solution to such problems, socialist planning. And for some as well is degrowth and the focus on growth should not divide the movement right from the start, and it should rather be the social organization form that should be focused on. And here again, we have a response. We have capitalism and an elephant. And there it is said that the idea of growth became bigger than capitalism itself. And here, growth survived the abolition of capitalist relations in socialist countries. It survived the transition from Keynesianism to neoliberalism. Many self-declared socialists and or communists today defend growth. And in that sense, degrowth adherents, argue that overcoming growth itself already means overcoming the capitalist structures. And degrowth's main goal is to politicize the economy in order to democratically decide how production and consumption should be organized. So it questions it in another way. It just goes from another direction towards it. And here we have Tariq again. The central proposition here is that degrowth is not less of the same, but simply different. The objective is not to make an elephant leaner, but to turn an elephant into a snail. So we turn it into a snail. And furthermore, degrowth, the framework that has cracked open the imagination of scientists and activists over the past decade, is best understood as an element within a broader struggle for eco-socialism and anti-imperialism. And in that sense, and this is Hickel who writes it, I mean, he goes often more in this direction. And there are also other people, and one name you might know is...
Yeah. No, it's not mute.
Okay.
Victor? Can you hear us? Test?
Sí, muteado. No.
Yes.
Está muteado un ordenador.
No, but it's working. Test. Can you hear us? I think it's Victor's problem.
Yes, we hear you. I hear you.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, we hear you. Big praise.
Nice.
Good.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one name you might have heard of is Kohei Saito. I don't really know how to pronounce his name, but he also goes in this direction. He tries to take Marxist approaches of the means of production and include the concepts of degrowth into it, and sees more connection to it. The process of getting into the degrowth utopia is also often criticized. It should be slow, continuous, and a democratic process. So there should be a lot of different projects that should be started and organized in the whole world that in that case transition towards a new society. And in that sense, it is written that the start is capitalism, and that capitalism as itself and degrowth as itself is an economic abstraction or system as an abstraction, and everybody defines it a little bit different. So there is not a specific moment where we will end up in the degrowth society, and it's usually this kind of small projects that develop into a change of the society. And through that, there will be a discourse on what institutions to sustain, which ones to modify, which ones to protect, and which ones to abandon or create. But on the other side, there's also a contradiction, because the degrowth literature tries to tackle crises that are quite immediate and needs urgent projects and ideas, such as climate change or inequality. And then the small scale changes and change of values in the society are often seen as too slow to really tackle the problems that we have right now. And we see that in the degrowth literature, that most of its proposals are top-down ideas that say we have big ideas like renewable energies or public transport, taking the internet in control of the community and stuff. There are kind of big problems or ideas, proposals that cannot be just tackled by small ideas or small communities. And that because of that, there's this critique of most of these degrowth projects seem pretty large scale and statist left to me. Subway trains and streetcars can't be knitted together by skinny jean urban culturalists. Metal has to be mined and plastic parts manufactured by industry. How is this not big kid? I find it funny because this guy is working in the European Parliament and is usually writing against degrowth and more for like green socialism. Yeah. And we can ask the questions then as well. How will huge international companies be organized with that have a big impact on the society? And if these organizations are changed, how can we ensure that people just not all lose their job? How can just other countries not lose its economy through big companies changing its way of organization? Also because usually degrowth only talks about these small projects and not how we can transition from the big companies and organizations towards smaller organizations. And how can we ensure that the movement degrowth is regulated nationally and worldwide? And in that sense, the critique is that change usually comes quite fast in crisis or revolutions, and there needs to be fast actions and mass mobilization, which degrowth usually doesn't talk about. In like, how can we quickly, when there's a crisis, reorganize the society. Another critique, the last two critiques, and this one as well, is mostly from Marxist authors. Yeah, as you saw it in the beginning. And with this one, they criticize how in the degrowth literature people are addressed. Usually in the degrowth literature, it says we should consume less, decrease production, change our way of lifestyle. But it hides behind vague terms like consumers, polluters, or people from the global north. And that is kind of vague for like who is addressed here, who's the actor who should then live a frugal lifestyle or a degrowth lifestyle. And through that, the critiques are, degrowth takes a non-class approach towards consumption and production. It is true that some of the more privileged sectors of the working class, particularly in imperialist countries, consume excessively and wastefully. Degrowth, however, fails to account for the class that takes wasteful consumption to almost unimaginable levels, and this is the system that produces these production and consumption patterns. An increasing portion of the labor of the working class is wasted on supporting the consumption habits of the numerically small capitalist class. Who are these comparatively wealthy folks? Oh, everyone in the West. Once again, there's no class-based differentiation in developed countries. Degrowth is not sufficiently critical of power structures and lacks of an analytical treatment of the issue of class struggle. And last one is that others criticize degrowth as being a luxury debate that is rather guilt-ridden conviction that all of us consumers are the root of the problem. And we see it. I have it also here in Pontevedra that, for example, I find it hard to find a tram here, and we have like different cities and different living situations that do not allow us to live a degrowth life. To buy vegetarian food and cycle around the city might be easy in Stockholm, but very hard in most of the American countries. And gardening might be working for people who can work less through gains in the productivity. But for people who work as a nurse or a shop assistant, they don't have productivity gains. It can have more leisure time. So the critique is here that the change should more come from a world systemic change with a class-based perspective, and should change the way we live in a city or as a society, and not the individual. The individual shouldn't be addressed that much, and especially degrowth shouldn't hide behind vague terms, and should point out to the people who really consume and destroy their nature the most. And the same goes for the actor. The first one was more focused on who consumes, and the actor is more focused on who changes. And it usually, like I said before, it should be worker cooperatives, non-profit organizations, and alternative economic spaces that exist outside of the economic market or market economy. But then other people criticize exactly this idea and say that degrowth is a program only available for a minority of the world's people, even in the global north, who has the option to exit the economy. And yeah, it happens quite often that people try to change their life, try to find another job, but they're not able to because they're stuck in a situation where they cannot do it. And there the question is, who can start the working cooperative, or who can afford just buying a house and starting a housing cooperative. And the argument is as well that these small ideas, and I had this argument before already, that these small scale organizations cannot tackle the capitalist system and the environmental problems that capitalist organizations cause. And you might wonder what this is up there. This is the capitalist hammer that destroys the organization, the small scale cooperative, because it happens quite often that once a small new societal organization form challenges the capitalist system, they answer with repressing the new idea. And we have various examples from the past from communist societies as well. And that shows kind of that these ideas that really challenge the system lose in the end because there's just this force against it. And then the question comes again, who's the agent of the change? Who could deliver the transformation that we could need now? And also because change is most often coming from the crisis or the revolution. And we don't have this idea of revolution in the degrowth literature. And for this reason, also degrowth advocates write, degrowth will remain politically weak unless it manages to dialogue with the broadly defined global working class, including both wage labor and the myriad forms of work that support it and their organizations. But the problem in that is that if degrowth changes its proposals from addressing the individual and the state, like these as separate, and focuses more on the collective power of the society, it could lose its utopia of small scale, local and decentralized. And this is also this contradiction between focusing on the individual and the big social movement. And yet this is what also degrowth adherents say we should do to change the degrowth literature and its proposals into focusing more on the whole society and restructuring big groups to find its widespread recognition. Leonardi is one who writes also about it and says capital needs the valorizing potential of labor power, and that is a political resource degrowth should reclaim. Only through the struggle of the productive forces with the real relations of productions is a radical change possible. And another thing that I found interesting is that workers are usually seen as against the environmental movements because they have the fear of losing their job, especially in the fossil fuel sector. But there are apparently a lot of examples where environmental justice movements came from workers, and they were the main drivers behind the movement. So kind of these movement, also the environmental movement, should maybe seen in association with the labor forces rather than despite them. For that, it is said that a socialist movement must be able to offer workers more rather than less. The crucial point, however, is that each degree of warming means decisively less for those who are already materially dispossessed. This is why a degrowth approach must center class antagonism, and this is why climate change is class war. So for degrowth to become a movement with impact, it might need to put the workers and the class perspective more in the focus, and must unite the different streams of socialist movements and working class through addressing real-life problems like working conditions, climate change, gender pay gap, lobbyism, tax evasion, and old age poverty. So it can only be something that has force and can include people when it addresses the daily life problems. Or as others also say, we against those out there. So now we leave the Marxist perspective and go into funding the utopia. And there, okay, it doesn't do what I want. Ah, okay, it's just late. Yeah, it has often been argued as unaffordable because it leads to the deprivation of already poor people. And in that sense, it is argued that governments finance themselves through taxing market activities, and GDP growth translates into additional revenues that the state can use then to public services and healthcare, culture, education. In most countries, the welfare system, especially in the pensions and health insurances, are growth-dependent areas, thus making modern governments become GDP junkies. So we have a society, I focus now on Europe mostly, but that are dependent on GDP and growth, and that don't work without it anymore. And then questions arise: how would that be repaid in a contracting economy? How can the transition to a green infrastructure be ensured if less money is available? How will we fund the degrowth transition, since most profits come from extractive industries? And how can we ensure high levels of security and the livelihood of the most vulnerable? And we already have the struggle now that in growing economies that the government cannot finance itself. I have the example of Germany that needs 1.4% more of the GDP every year just to maintain its welfare. Yeah, it's like that. I don't have just through migration, war, COVID-19, climate change, etc. So only in Germany there needs to be 16 billion euros more every year than it can thrive in through taxes. So then again, the question comes: how can we ensure that climate neutrality can be achieved without changing the money or the public sector? Cato summarizes that in we can't be green if we're in red. And anyway, there has been multiple answers by degrowth adherents again. I will show some of them, mostly to show there is something, but there's also sometimes critique on the ideas that exist already. This one I have labeled under high quality spending. In that sense, it's quite clear what we can do. We can transition from coal industries, from fossil fuels into new areas like renewable energies. In the degrowth literature, they talk about smaller but better post-growth public services And there the focus should be more on prevention, like education and self-care, also open source drug research and making health accessible for everybody. And it is also answered that climate crisis, the more we have, the warmer it gets. This is also quite expensive. So, or even more expensive than a transition towards degrowth. And another argument is that also if we reorganize the society and how the firms run to not-for-profit, mission-driven cooperatives or state firms or commons, that they could also need less money. The same goes for private insurances, medical practices, and private schools. This one, progressive taxation. I don't think I have to say much about this. I think most of us agree on that. Parik again, he writes, if the first degrowth is the one of inequality, then it means taxes must increase, especially for the rich ones. And that leads also, of course, for more money that the state has. Okay, now we come into another idea, the modern monetary theory. One that proposes it and supports the idea is mostly Jason Hickel. And does anybody know modern monetary theory? Yeah. Okay. It says mostly that we now balance our public money in what we take in. So we have to take in money first before we can spend it. And the modern monetary theory says the governments can spend as much money as they want, as long as they own the currency, as long as it's their own currency. And oops. Oh. Okay, my laptop doesn't work. No. You see it here is water, and the only restriction that is kind of the overflow, that is inflation, which means you can put as much money in the economy as if you want, as long as it doesn't drive into inflation, and you can support then the projects that you want to support with. And this kind of the inflation that has come from too much money hasn't been seen much the last decades. Like in America, especially, that happened quite often. Especially Stephanie Kelton is writing about that a lot. She was during Biden's time kind of advising in the public monetary field, and there they spent a lot of extra money, additional money, and that somehow, I don't know how they do it, but can see where the inflation comes from, and it didn't lead to any inflation at all, or just a little bit. So this is a theory where there's a lot more money available for governments, but it's also a reason why it's called. There's a reason why it's called theory, because it hasn't been practiced so often yet. And there's also not many people who research in this field, so there's not much empirical data or any modeled ideas how that could really work. And for that reason, a lot of people call it a political manifesto, a policy polemic for depressed times, or a moral statement, more a moral statement than a genuine economic theory. And others argue that it cannot function for every country the same way, because the origin of the idea is in the United States, and they have the ruling power of the US dollar. which means for them it might work, but maybe not for other countries who are less strong in their currency. Sovereign money systems is another idea. It works the same way as the modern monetary theory, just that commercial banks don't exist anymore. So just the government spends money, which means also the same way governments can spend money. The loans for the state are zero. The interest rate for the loans are zero, and that makes it just very cheap for the state to finance projects and transition to a degrowth era. Especially it is said that the transition towards the sovereign money system would lead to a one-off seigniorage revenue, which means there's a lot of money that is just coming. I actually didn't really understand how that works, but apparently it leads to especially the Eurozones being able to halve its public debt. So there's a lot of money that could be extra there. And also in the degrowth literature, they say that this could lead to a degrowth transition, or could be used during a degrowth transition. Yeah, but like the MMT degrees critiques, there's somebody wanting to come in. They say there also this counter argument that it could decrease the welfare and lead to a financial instability. Reasons for that is insufficient credits through the influence of the state, that there's not really much empirical data, historical evidence, and it is also argued that these top-down structures from the state, that the state has all the power over the money creation, doesn't give the people much money. Another idea are local currencies. They should exist next to the state. That are just small currencies. I don't know if you have that here in Conservator, but they can be issued by anyone. You just have to convince people to use it, and that leads to states being able, or just local governments to be able to spend money without borrowing it. So they don't have to use the money that they have. They can just issue a new currency and use it as long as people use it. And as long as people don't, because it's how do you call it? It's a promise to pay the state currency. So people can convert it back, but as long as it doesn't happen, the cost for the funding of the region is not for the government. And another idea is time currency. That is also an idea that money isn't used, but kind of the time that you use as a currency, that you have time banks that see what you did for a specific time, and you can convert it back into something. Let's say you take care of children or pets or anything from other people for an hour, then you can ask for somebody to repair something in your home for an hour. Degrowth adherents really like that idea because it has a stable utility, so it doesn't have inflation or anything, and it gradually pushes demand out of the monetary economy. But here's the critique that a sharing network of public services could probably not work for every neighborhood and is already deemed to be unequal. And it could lead to a regression of collective solidarity, like unconditional healthcare. And there's this critique, hardly anybody would like to replace the modern welfare state by trust and solidarities of neighborhoods or networks of friends. And additionally, and I will get there in the next chapter, this agenda could increase the gender inequality even more, because who does the work if decommodification is happening, which means there's no money involved in it anymore, mostly women. And Nancy Fraser says it could be a vector of oppression for women. So, it happens again. Okay. There are concrete ideas, but it is also, some ideas are also described as undesirable and delusional and not proven enough empirically or theoretically yet. And especially the sovereign money system or the modern monetary theory are called as like just ideas, utopias or something like that. And I found it also interesting because I didn't find much empirical stuff on that. And that leads still to people question the whole idea of degrowth, because they find it maybe a good idea, but not really viable for people to go there, because it leads to less for the most vulnerable people already. And last one. Money has mostly helped women to get free from oppression, families and partners. And if you have deep economization, so more money that can help you to get out of some situations, you cannot just run away from people when you don't have money. So you're dependent on social relations. And there are a lot of studies that show that women are most affected by cuts in state social services, and that care work is mostly shifted even more, an example, from healthcare systems back into the households, mostly to women. So for reason, the idealization of the patriarchal pre-capitalist relations of indigenous communities is being criticized. This idea of having your own small community, and also can be questions if there's if you go against the throwaway culture. So you repair things, you fix things at home. It can be questioned who does end up doing the work in the end. And some degrowthers even call for abandoning vacuums, microwave, dishwashers, and also there. Yeah, people say that would mostly fall on women. Yeah, I read that quickly out. I mean, you probably read it already, but marketization can actually foster emancipation by weakening traditional supports for domination. And the green notions of self-reliance, sustainable communities, and doing one's bit at home in the public domain threaten to intensify women's already unsustainable burden of responsibility for care. And I have here another inclusion. I cited Yo there. Yay. Exactly that. Power hierarchical specific analysis is needed to disrupt the problem shifting of the unequal work share and support with overcoming patriarchal structures. And therefore, instead of attempting to integrate the sphere of reproduction and care within a structure with a contradictory logic, it is rather the social services and for-profit economy that needs to be transformed with the logic of care. So the idea of decommodifying the economy is said to maybe be more sustainable to scrutinize and still have this economic sphere, but make it more equal and change the perception of hair work. Degrowth itself stands, of course, against oppression and patriarchal structures and strives towards more egalitarian division of labor between men and women. But it helps little if the structures that come with it lead to inequality. Yes, that was this.
We have 2 minutes, otherwise we don't have
Yeah. This is
time for debate.
Yeah, I think we should go for a debate. I was talking very long. Here we have an overview again. I would not go over it again to summarize it. I talked very long. It was very long, sorry. I'm happy if we have a, discussion about that all, because that's most interesting, I think.
I think you've done an amazing work, like the sort of review of Degrowth that you have produced. It's very hard to do and to come up with the themes and the way you organize it. So I think congratulations. It's a great piece of work. So my question is mainly like, how did you go about in selecting the readings and how did you come up with the literature and all these things?
Yeah.
Did you follow any process, any list, or I don't know, like did you just follow from one article to another? Did you choose the themes from the beginning, or how did you go about it?
Yeah, it was hard for me because I was also first just reading things and then looking mostly what do I see the most, what are the critiques I see the most, and focus on them because I if they're the most, I think that they're the most important ones. Yeah, and in the end, it was more like hanging from one article to another one. What really helped me was one book I got from Alex about, I cited him a lot, Timothy Perry, where he also goes into the critiques of degrowth. And from there on, I could also just dig into the different critiques. Yeah, but I would also say it was a bit random, and there are also other critiques where I didn't have time to dig into it anymore. Yeah.
I feel like there's something that you said about really getting the working class into the subject and making them understand how degrowth is helping. And there is this sentence which also comes from Harry. And it's I'm not sure he said it first, but it's something I read in his book. It's degrowth is aiming at decoupling the power to consume from the power to live. Does it make sense? Yeah. And I think this is the main thing that doesn't allow workers and the working class to get into the degrowth movement, because there is the idea of losing jobs, because there is this idea that job is needed to survive, and activity creates job, which creates the power of living. Because no one was saying anything, so I needed to go with my question really fast, and I haven't planned the end. Is it possible to structure the economy in a way that creates these associations, to structure its activity? Economically speaking, I don't know. In the critique of degrowth, and specifically on the topic of funding the utopia, is it something doable to like as a way of transition. Sorry, I'm getting lost in my question. Is it possible to think of a way of like transitioning to a degrowth without like smoothly with creating activity that decouples those two aspects? I don't know. Like, I will end here. If you want to say something about it, if you want.
Yeah, I think it's more a question to like hear all of the people, because I mean, I would say I still know little about, and I mean, I read a lot now, but I feel like I'm still not deep enough to answer that. But I haven't read much about the like a specific how this could happen. Yeah, but others.
Concerning the limits of the growth. I don't know.
Nice. By the way, Elia is not going to solve all the problems, of course. I think it's already a lot. That's what he did in 6 months.
Yes, it's really cool to see like the result of the work. That's the first thing, like how it evolved from a kind of an idea to 2-3 topics that became one, and how did you structure, and how have you like kind of mix like what they say with the critiques, and we kind of see like how you start building your own opinion on this, which is really cool. It's a lot of work, and it's really great, because I mean it's a really difficult exercise, no? To say like yes, this is what is, because also there is something missing in the presentation, because like we all know, but you also introduce in the report like what is degrowth, so it's really well connected also in the report. So I think it's a really interesting exercise, and the way you do it and the way you reclaim it is really cool, and really difficult, no? Because I mean it's so diverse and so kind of undefined that we think it's defined, and it's not. So I think it really helps to, because I guess it's the objective, from what I understood of the objective of your report, is that you see the critiques, but also to help yourself to understand, but also to try to push like how this can become more relevant, no? So I think in that sense it's really cool what you did, and it's really nice that you do all this work, that's have a lot of reference, and you have been through everything. Like the only thing I missed is what I told you before, and is what you told you about how did you choose. But I mean it's really difficult, no? Because there are so much critiques that come from different places that it's really difficult to define.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's really good. And just for the form, then I have some questions. Like I think there is like some, it's more like an opinion, no? But maybe what I would miss, not for the report, no, is that that you see like things like less, more ambiguous sometimes, or more complementary. Like for example, in the democratic part, I think it's really interesting what you point out, because there is a lot of contradiction and misunderstanding of what is democracy. So maybe some things that could have helped, or that could be useful to explore like in the future, is how do you, instead of seeing like direct technocratic in a dichotomic way, or a separated way, how these are articulated, no? Because in any kind of group or any kind of society, you have a mix of everything. And the same for the whole of it, like maybe what could be interesting is how do these critiques articulate with each other, no? Because that could help you also to construct your own way of reading them, no? Because maybe, I don't know, the question is not about if it's a good or not, but about the dimension that it takes, no? Sorry for the long feedback.
No, thank you. If I can add something to what Alex said, is the fact that I think this kind of exercise can be useful to see the evolution of the people, like defining themselves or labeling themselves degrowth supporter, because it's not the same things to talk about the first books of Latouche or André Gortz, that is also like using the degrowth expression, to what Jason Hickel is saying, for example. So there is like an evolution, and many of these Marxist criticism, for example, or other points that you raised are being like discussed. I mean, it's been 20 years of discussion about this, no? So some of them are now sounds more like typical strawman arguments, no? So I think there's something that we need to acknowledge, that this discourse of degrowth is being evolving a lot. We also, like many of your other points that you raised, we also did raise it in a similar way in our work in our papers. So I think it's important to see this as like a revolution, no, for intellectual debates, and no, I think that is important to.
If I can add further praise to what you did, because it's correct with the things they were saying. I think you did a much better job at highlighting the limits of degrowth than Van den Berg and Savini.
Exactly.
Much better. Seriously, because I think you really grasp the stuff that Mary said. Not everything that comes with the word degrowth or doesn't include the word degrowth should be included. I think you take a much more complex understanding of it. Even if you are highlighting limits that I think are relevant. I think seriously, if you want to pitch your report as a better review of the limits of degrowth than Van den Berg and Savini, I think you definitely have a pitch there.
Yeah. No, I find it to like these three things. I found it interesting. First of all, also to see this like evolution. How it changed and how things were talked about now but not before, and that the people tried to include these critiques. And this is also what I really liked about degrowth always, is that it tries to learn and doesn't change, like, or just doesn't try to hide behind its like idea and blocks everything away that is kind of a critique. And yeah, I mean, especially the famous people, I think, include more and more in their work that they do. And I found it very hard with also to the two of you with the critiques, because they were all mixed. Like sometimes they were in like one article, a lot of different things mixed together, and then tried to understand what do they really mean with that when they talk about something, and what, like, in which category can I put it in my head so it makes sense as a critique. Yeah.
Okay, I think it would be nice to share the documents with the group, not the final version of the documents. And thank you a lot to Alex that supervised them.
Thank you for listening. Sorry that it took so long.
Thank you, Elia. What is the software of the presentation? Because we like it.